All right, so now that we discussed those natural phenomena that lead to the extinction and evolution of organisms on Earth, let's talk about how we're messing stuff up. Obviously, that's sort of the theme of this class, and I do want you to try to have a positive attitude towards our future, but extinction is something that we are abundantly aware of today because we are causing so many. Every year we're facilitating the extinction of numerous organisms. Many we have yet to be discovered before they go extinct. But, biodiversity. Evolution is a major sort of driver of biological change, obviously, and having high aspects of genetic, ecosystem, species, and ecosystem service diversity helps drive evolution and helps keep ecosystems stable and healthy. But ecosystems and biodiversity are the product of both extinction and the development of new species. We are doing that now. We are a major driver of extinction. And we need to sort of be aware of that and fully understand our capabilities and our capacity for both good and bad. So let me just go over briefly the major causes of biodiversity loss and extinction. We have habitat loss, the introduction of invasive species, pollution, climate change, things like that. So let me give you an example that is literally surrounding me right now. I'm in the Sandias, and around me are a variety of trees. We have some oak, we have some ponderosa pine, we have some juniper and pinon. I'm in a transition zone for the ecosystem right now. Lower in elevation, we have more desert scrub. Higher in elevation, up the mountain, we have more fir forests and things like that. But this forest is undergoing some pretty dramatic changes because of climate change. Everything that's happening here, for the most part, is natural. You may have heard about the bark beetle that is killing off a sizable amount of the ponderosa pines and other pines that are found up here. And what happens is the beetle lives for a period of time, usually in the warmer season, and it does damage to trees, kills trees normally, they fall, they rot, and that's the natural process. But because of climate change, that active season is dramatically extended into the winter on both sides of summer, spring, and fall anyway. So there's more time for these beetles to do their job, and therefore they're killing more trees than they normally would. Also, human fire management has allowed more trees to exist than normally would. Usually fire would come through here pretty frequently and kill off a lot of these trees and allow a more healthy ecosystem to develop that is living within its capacity. But human beings have stopped fire almost entirely in the western U.S., even though fire is an essential part of this ecosystem. So climate change and fire suppression has allowed more trees to exist and has allowed the bark beetle more time to do its work. And therefore, we have a situation where we have more dead trees and we have more trees. So that's a recipe for disaster. And you can see examples of this all over the West when you have some of the largest fires in history occurring. And you can see around me, there's a lot of trees here, and there are a lot of trees on the ground here because there are just too many stinking trees. And this is a problem, but we are witnessing, as you walk up through here, the changing of an ecosystem. The climate is changing, and human activity is facilitating the pretty dramatic changes in the western U.S. in our forests. And we'll see what happens in the next century or so when your grandchildren are hiking on this trail, what it might look like, how things might change, how our activities are leading to the extinction, or at least the localized extinction of species, and maybe the development of new species that are adapting to new ecosystems that we are creating, these novel anthropogenic ecosystems. So I'd encourage you to come up here and take a hike, not just because it's fun and interesting and beautiful and, but also to look at what is happening and use it as a way to better understand how ecosystems function, how biodiversity works. Look at the birds, look at the plants, especially in late spring, it's wonderful up here. And contemplate your activity on this planet and its ability to facilitate both positive and negative change. All right, let's do our sort of lightning round on relevant vocabulary for evolution. So speciation, that's the development of new species. This can happen through various processes, as we've discussed, but this is where, one population of species splits for some reason, and through, geographic isolation, reproductive isolation, which I'll get to in a sec, this population or this individual within a population deviates enough and changes enough over thousands or millions of years typically to become a brand new species, which means it's unable to reproduce and have fertile offspring with another species. That's what a species is. It's an organism that is unable to reproduce and have fertile offspring with a different species. So this is why a mule is a hybrid. It's not a new species because it's unable to reproduce. It's the product of a horse and a donkey. It's a good animal, but it can't reproduce, so it's not a new species. But it is the hybrid of two different species. So we have geographic isolation. This is an important first step in speciation events. I've talked about this a little bit, but you can imagine a river, a volcanic eruption, continent splitting, create two different populations of one species, and that is sort of the essential first step, at least in easily understanding how speciation works. So first you need isolation, geographic isolation, and then you need reproductive isolation. So even though you might have a species that is split apart by a river, they have to not be able to reproduce. They have to not be able to share their genes. That's an essential part, because as you know, genes are the sort of molecular driver of evolutionary change, as we've discussed. In order for evolution to occur, reproductive isolation, genetic isolation needs to occur as well. So there are many, many examples of this all over the world. In fact, every species is essentially an example of some form of genetic or reproductive isolation, but some common ones, at least in North America, are like the fox species that we see in the Arctic and in the southern parts of the state. So like the gray fox or the Arctic fox used to be one species, but as one moved north and one moved south, they became isolated by distance more than like a physical barrier, and they changed. One became better adapted to an Arctic climate with seasonal long-term snow, so it developed its white coat in the winter, and then the southern example of the species, like the gray fox, adapted to a more temperate climate in the United States. There are two different species at this point, even though they're pretty recently separated to become two different species, only in the last million years or so. So that's one example. There's some other cool examples I'll link to in some videos and maybe some readings. So extinction, as I'm sure you know, is when an entire species is gone forever, ceases to exist. This happens to every species. Literally every species at some point will become extinct, even human beings. That doesn't mean that we won't adapt and evolve into something new. There have been multiple examples of the Homo genus. We are Homo sapiens. There was Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and maybe a couple others that I can't remember right now, but for a period over the last 2 million years, there have been numerous examples of our genus, and we just happen to be the only example of our species alive right now. That doesn't mean things won't change in the future. Another term to know is endemic, a species that is found in only one location. So many examples all over the world of this. One example that is well known and that I hate is the panda. It is endemic to a specific location in China. And this is important to know because these are the species that are pretty susceptible to extinction because they're only found in one location. So they're not spread all over the globe like human beings or coyotes. They're in one place. So if they were to go extinct, if their small habitat were to be disturbed to the extent where they can't bounce back, then we have a problem. Silvery minnow, our local example, is a good example of this. Silvery minnow used to be found throughout the Rio Grande and the Pecos rivers, basically from north of Albuquerque all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's endemic to this river system. Now it's only found in between Cochiti Dam and Elephant Butte Dam, and its habitat is under extreme stress, and it is very likely to go extinct within your lifetime. So that's why it's an important concept. And that's why we need to really sort of watch out for these species that are endemic. We need to watch out for all species. You know, if it were up to me, I would maybe not try to save every panda and focus our attention in other locations on less charismatic organisms. If you haven't heard my panda rant by now, you should ask me about it. But, you know, endemic species are very much at risk.